When a fan of survival horror is asked what the first horror game was, they will always have a totally different answer. A lot of newbies to the genre will likely say Resident Evil, then more hardcore gamers will point to Alone in the Dark or Clock Tower. But the earliest horror games are in fact from the early 80s, the very first being Nostromo for the Commodore PET. But of course I hadn't even heard of the PET line of computers, so it didn't exactly seem to make a very big splash in the gaming industry. The first horror game to garner any real attention was Haunted House for the Atari 2600, being developed by James Andreasen, who was responsible for Real Sports Baseball, and it was published by Atari, so it received relatively modest sales. It has good jump scares and surprisingly decent atmosphere, which was praised by critics of the day. You are represented on screen by a pair of eyes in the darkness, and the only noises you will hear are your own footsteps and the lightning striking when an enemy gets you. Your objective is to collect the pieces of the urn of Mr. Graves and remove it from the house to put his soul to rest, or something along those lines. Of course, the only thing you brought with you are a book of matches to light your way through the haunted house's dark corridors. Sound spooky enough for you? The house has multiple floors and 3 urn pieces which are scattered across them. Depending on what difficulty you have the game set to, there could be a maze of locked doors, faster monsters, and in general way more item juggling. You can only hold one item at a time, be it the urn fragments, the key, or the magic scepter that makes the monsters go away. Said monsters are a giant spider, a bat, and the ghost of Mr. Graves, all of which will cause your match to go out if nearby, which doesn't really matter too much since you have unlimited matches, but it's certainly an inconvenience nonetheless. The monsters themselves are not only an inconvenience, but can cause you to lose a life if they catch you. You start off with 9 lives, I don't know, I guess we're a kitty cat or something, but they drop away pretty quick on higher difficulties. If you manage to not lose them all and make it to the end, you get rewarded with 4 seconds of the Twilight Zone theme and an epileptic seizure. It reminds me just how awesome the sound design and lighting are. The doors slap open as you run down dark hallways, hoping you will find that darn urn piece. Up and down the stairs you go, and BAM! You're slapped right in the face by a ghost. It just goes to prove for the 100th time that the best horror games don't rely on graphics and deep story, but instead they're feeding dread of jump scares so it has any real impact. That's what many horror games from the 2000s lacked. Resident Evil 4, Dead Space, and Fear all had the issue of not feeding dread at all, since you had a huge edge over the enemies and they didn't work on making you ever feel desperate. Sure, they had their moments, but they weren't nearly as scary as something as basic as Haunted House. It gets an 8.5 out of 10. A little frustrating at times, but still quite good. This game will set you back about $6 and is quite worth the price.